Alas, poor Yorick, I knew him well. Horatio, a man of infinite jest. Where be his jibes, his songs now? I'm the glue and paper guy. This is Shrek, and we're going to finish him up. Meet the parts. We've already met these parts. It's been quite a long time. Different guy now. Different YouTuber. Better at video. Better at this. This is the original. Built him pushing 2 years ago. His intended destination is for a very dear friend who carries the Shrek persona better than anyone I know. I've done tremendous things to do the second iteration of my friend here. Here's a creepy one. We have eyeballs. Hand painted, various washes of acrylics over top of a ping pong ball. Everybody I've showed him to has cringed. The difference between Shrek's original face and his new face are the paper eyeballs. So I've taken considerable care to hide the various white lines and other indications that there's very separate pieces of paper here. If you put the two faces together, this one's printed slightly lighter and obviously suffers with far fewer flaws. This is the shape of the ultimate stand. My intent is to make this float in the air. So the foam core, printed logo carved out, put on these posts. The second iteration will have a much more streamlined base, which is harder to find, harder to see. And I'm going to white all of this, even if the base at the bottom of the model remains black. One of the things that happened when I did this part over a couple of hours the other day just to prove how it was going to work was that I found that when I properly squished Shrek's face, I got this much more lifelike portrait. Originally, he was sort of just bloated out and wider, looked like he had too much water weight. And that's now been resolved. So the rest of the parts, I've saved myself the tedium and saved you the tedium as well. All of these jigsaw bits are the remainder of the back of the skull and his marvelous ears. I have some video of painting the eyeballs. I have some video of cutting and scoring the ears, just as a reference, as a placeholder. We've been through that a million times. And I'll shoot some video of how I color and assemble these to get to the point where we have a second Shrek. Ultimately, we'll video the construction of the base and wrap him up. This is exactly the first and second time I have ever painted an eyeball. I'm not sure I'll ever do it again, but I am excited by the result. Shrek originally had these eyeballs, and on camera it comes through, very shiny, but it's quite fuzzy actually. I think it would look fine in the model. However, I wanted more realism, and there we go. Yeah, a couple of tutorials, but mostly I've just never done this before, so I did it. I certainly peeled off a page from Lou Dalmezzo's book and Ken Spriggs' book, actually, because you can see that I used the masks. So, yeah, a couple of tutorials, but mostly I've just never done this before, so I did it. I certainly peeled off a page from Lou Dalmezzo's book and Ken Spriggs' book, actually, because you can see that I used the masks. So, a couple of tutorials, but mostly I've just never done this before, so I did it. So I'm thinking that's going to look pretty dramatic inside the model itself. And there he is. Let's see where we're at with the Shrekinator here. This is the completed face. I've finished that out a very long time ago. And it's built to a much higher standard than the original. I have a test piece that I made even earlier than that. The idea here was to test coloration and how to make the best possible seam. And as you can see, we got a pretty good standard there. There's not a lot of obvious coloration between the parts. This was done before I'd figured out that Pepakura could eliminate its dotted lines. Regardless, that's the standard I'm trying to rise to. That appears to be the case for 99.9% of this. Although as I proceed through this, I'm applying some newer techniques, filing edges, trimming them to the finest detail, etc. All of these parts are at the point now where they're more or less symmetrical. You see these pairs of a left and a right. I've deliberately cut them out already and scored them already, so I don't have to do any more thinking about that. So the basic rhythm is to take a part and color it in on the edges. Paper has thickness. It's never a truly one-dimensional surface. These are, I've talked about these other times, these are watercolor pencils, and you know, I should, I suppose, be hiding the logos there. Watercolor pencils are less waxy than map pencils, so infinitely better, also infinitely more expensive than map pencils in general. What I found is this brownish color is the first layer of a mixed color that minimizes the attention to these seams as much as is humanly possible. When you do this, you tend to flare the edge. And you always do it from the back to the front. Keep the money side away from you, would probably be the good buzzword there. So I have money side away from me, and I'm just stroking right along the edge there. You see that it flattens it out, but your thumbnail will make that go away again. And I'm adding color to any place that would be an exposed edge. That's obvious because there are no tabs sticking up. You have to be careful. You're walking a fine line. You want this to be lighter and darker at the same time. It needs to, and you know, that's everything louder than everything else. But what you want is to have that white line disappear, and lighter's better than darker. And so for this particular thing at this particular time on this particular model, I'm making this mix of brown and green, which as I use it, disappears it really well. It is incredibly hard to, other than the obvious physicality of it, it's hard to see that that's the edge of a piece of paper because the coloration has disappeared. There's so little difference in contrast as to be vanishing, and differences in contrast are what your eyes see. So always point to, keep the good stuff away from you. And somehow this crazy green that I've got here and this brown are light enough to, play the chameleon trick. And the mushrooming of the edge has disappeared again by my rubbing like that. You can see that it's right back to where it started from. The other thing that I'll do, just an example piece, I'm not ready to use this yet. The other thing that I'll do quite often is try to add some color in the back. Thus obscuring anything that might stand proud of the joint itself. And I may not be ready for that part yet, but that part's ready. You can, of course, see the score lines when you look at it, which makes it easier to really fold up and put in there. So the rhythm is pretty simple. I want the money side to be the best. So instead of assembling this beautiful thing back here and going that way, I'm assembling this beautiful thing right here and working this way, such that the greatest attention to each joint is applied as we move backwards. This is going to warp down into his chin and the edges of the bust. This is going to morph into the back and top of his cranium. Those seem like they haven't been connected yet, but they haven't been connected yet because there's a dual triangular piece that goes in above each eyebrow. I can't get enough of this, so I just keep doing it. Also, I'm considering really strongly the point in time at which I want to put these on. I think now that point is probably closer, but not quite what I thought originally. What I thought originally was I want to do this because then I can stick down the edges back here before I get all this settled. That is a straight line to a cockeyed model, and I'm not going there. So it is probably best to not do this until the last bleeding edge, and do it at the moment of final assembly. By way of wish list, having detailed the eyes to the degree that I did, I need to get some black construction paper, and I think I'm going to add eyebrows. I think I can bring some more life into the lips by using the same technique that I used on the other model, going with the gloss nail polish. It's several layers. The first layer is going to sink into the paper and disappear, but it should also seal the surface. And then another layer or so, carefully applied, to wet those lips up a little bit and give them some life. The idea of some of that UV resin glue occurred because I wonder if that wouldn't just lay on the surface and then be a drop of spittle on the lip or what have you. Moreover, I think this guy needs some increased detail. I need to darken in his snoot a little bit so it's more obvious that it's there. Some experimentation on that thread. There's his ears. I just did these off camera. And I found that using the matte pencils inside the ear gave me the opportunity to both darken the bottom of it and add a little additional brown. This is also a good time to note that there's some very, very good markers that are available, two-ended and fancy and in very great gradations of color. We are possessed of such things, and I will go back in here probably after final assembly and before final mounting and add some color at strategic points with those markers in the same way I did with the original, because that'll disappear another level of these more or less obvious edges. So the whole thing here is truly a knit one, purl two, of making these one after another, and laying them in a piece at a time and carefully joining the edges. So I'm mostly doing it off camera, simply because it's sort of boring. And if you've seen one, you've seen them all. If you've seen me cut the pieces, you've seen me cut the pieces. So we go with it, and we'll check in on the progress as we grow backwards toward the back and the top of the skull periodically. It's a good time to check in on our green friend, largely because I think this is absolutely hilarious. He sort of looks like Wilson the basketball, or something from some bizarre Japanese cartoon, some rabbit character, or maybe the blue guy that runs around with the tick. It's also illustrative of where I'm at, what the process has been with this. I've said many times about this that I'm building a balloon one tile at a time, essentially. And I feel like if I proceed from the front to the back, then I have the opportunity to minimize the jaggedy white lines to the greatest degree. So what I've been doing is going circle after circle. I'm down to the point here where that's going to be the final layer. And so I was working my way around the back, and now across the eyebrows and the cranium here, that's the entirety of the top of his head. So, suddenly I'm into 5 or 6 pieces left, and I have the complete skull. There's some spots here I'm going to have to figure out exactly how that tiny little joint right there is going to line up. And I'm working always from the place where the most visible joint is the best outward. There's going to be some compromises. This may not work out as I expected, and I'll have to think about some mitigation strategies. But I don't know, those goofy ears. It's just a I mean, come on, that's hilarious. So I'll keep going and fill in the back of the head, fill in the top. And the next time you see him, he'll be the balloon, and we'll be talking about putting in eyes and working toward the base. Now I'm of two minds about a lot of that right now. But I think in the end, the only way to get eyes that look right out at me is to mount those eyes with an entirely formed skull. And in fact, as I talk it through, it may be best if the surface here, which establishes the form, has a big old hole in the middle of it so I can get my mitt through it and put them in, or something very similar. So much for that, though. You know, I'm just going to keep on putting things on one tiny little joint at a time. It's basically glue a joint, wait for it to dry, go to the next one, go to the next one, and I'm gluing them one at a time so that I'm not going to deform what I've already done. There's places where, you know, there will be an activity of cleanup after. I'll probably get after it, as I've said, with the marker and do some other things to try and hide the joints a little more. And you can see a world where, you know, bracing that up and filling the whole skin in with a skin of paper clay or something would make an even more lifelike portrait. You know, who knows? Not for this one. So we proceed. Mr. Shrek the Rabbit and all. I'm getting really close here. I've got the entirety of the front of the skull, the top of the cranium, all the way down around behind the jaw and the neck complete. We have ear holes. And the next step here is to get enough structure in the behind to support this thing in the way that I think it will be shaped, because at that point it's time for the eyes. Also time for the ears. I want access to put the ears, secure the ears well and get good joints here in its opposite number. An interesting thing that I thought I would share here, each of these pieces, as I've discussed, has the edges colored to make them disappear. They're cut and scored. There's a thing about them too. Each piece has a key facet. So when I'm gluing these things on, I'll stick my finger through his eyeball to hold him still. As I'm gluing these things on, there is one edge that needs to be secured very precisely to eliminate the little hole there that you may be able to see in the corner by my thumb, and to make sure that the rest of the part aligns. So that key edge has to be laid down accurately, carefully, and precisely. And once you do that, the rest of the part fits in with the same level of precision as these others. So what I'm going to do for that piece, that back of the skull, is grab the tacky glue that I'm using. And I have found also that gluing the part, not the tab, is the way to go. You get less garf to wipe off after you secure it. That's a lot. This paper and this glue are friendliest with a little more, because it takes a little longer for the glue to wet than begin to cure. This particular version of this glue from the Orange Cow place dries cures in a more rubbery kind of consistency. It's interesting stuff. You saw how it flicked off the knife. It's not the school glue, it's a tacky. And I'm satisfied now that the chemical composition is different. So that key facet, if I can get a hold of him. I've had a real problem with that because there's not a lot of place to grip him. That key facet is this one, because I want to fill in the vertex closest to his shoulder and meet the vertex up the skull and get that clean edge with as little as possible glue leaking out. And this stuff takes a little bit to wet before it starts to cure. And this particular joint is easy to demonstrate that because it's long and it's flat and it's more or less easy to put together. So I'm compromising between that vertex and this vertex down here, and I'm going to get a little bit of a hole there behind the cheek. Good compromise. So from letting these cure pretty substantially before I put other joints in, because if that stays cured and fixed, the rest of this goes together much more simply. But I'll march up the part from here. You see that one goes inside. And when that's all put together, that'll be a very clean connection right there. And we'll have a really good solid ear. If you put your hand behind your ear and grab that prominence, that's where that is in the anatomy. And we'll have to work out whether that tab goes underneath, obviously, but we'll have to work out exactly how. But what I get from worrying about that key is a much higher precision in joining the rest. You may be able to see some of the greeny brown going on here with the colored pencil, and that's more greeny than browny. Kind of catch as catch can. So these two are going in. Final bits of the neck secured. I'll have more or less a slot down the back where I can have enough of a rounded structure and his face in the proper proportion to aim those eyes. And I'm guessing it's going to be one at a time from here, perhaps with a slightly different adhesive. And I'm just going to make that eye stare right at me and make sure that the highlights are in the right spot, consistent eye to eye, to try to remove as much gap around that eye as possible to make it look as lifelike as possible. So there we go. Next time we see this, he's going to have ears and he's probably going to have eyes, because that's something I need to really focus on, pun intended. So I'm not going to try and shoot it. And away we go. Our hero's several more steps closer to being alive. There's some teeth in there. The skull is total and complete. I fixed that last hinge. Where I'm going now is to try to get a rim to solidify this down here before I put a covering in there for the base. There's got to be an easier way to do this. I don't know it. So what I've been doing is making stencils one step at a time and then cutting it out of this heavy mat board. I love this stuff. I'm using it on the ATST project and anywhere else I can. Black because if you build a spaceship or a robot out of it, you have that black underneath your paint. And it responds better to the laser, I think, a little bit. Although I've had no trouble cutting white stuff, despite the protestations of various support groups. So, there's you make a stencil, cut it out of this, glue it onto Shrek. I was working in the middle of the night last night, so I did the easy stuff. These were only medium easy. But you see the idea, I mean, a full rim here. And the rigidity that you get from that is significant. It would make it much easier to stencil out this area here. Two ways to do it, and I think in the end the easiest way to do it is from the outside. Because the outside is the inside, you can ignore the thickness of the paper and other things. These are obvious. And they're sticky, just sticky enough on one edge. This here is two profiles. There's a score line there in the middle. So I want this and then this. On these front ones, I actually built it up. As I'd said, there's a rib in here. That helps. It's okay. This is a different. I went flat with these two. That's fine. This is a different thing, and so I want to have some profile there. So I'm going to make two of them. I'll take the sticky edge and line it up as accurately as I can along where I want the fold to be. It's going to flatten out a little bit when I put it on there. Come on, Tim. Make it look easy. There. Yeah. Now, see, that's stuck to that. Having it stuck, I can use a little simple physics to find the other side. The stuff's translucent. In this case, we're going to use the enormous flashlight. I'll use the desk lamp as well. So here's the enormous flashlight. I can see where those are. Well, I only want the triangle. So I want that point, and that point. I make a little cross. It makes it a little easier to see the center. And that's a, it's a goopy center. And yeah, you can see all the holes shining through there too a little bit. I don't regard those as important because once it's up on the shelf, more or less disappear. So now I have, and these can get, in a couple of these cases they're complex because they have 4 points, etc. But I can make now a triangle. The enormous flashlight is so I don't have to turn on a bunch of lights when I inevitably drop every part I work with under the desk while I'm working. And Lieutenant Commander Lori bought me that beautiful thing a couple Christmases ago. Great for chasing cats in the middle of the night. Now, full disclosure, that's a kitchen accident. Not a modeling accident. You see what I'm doing? I'm making the edges. Where are they? There's my, sort of silly cross point and the other point. And I'm finding that these aluminum triangles are better and better at substituting for that much beloved ruler that I have for cutting paper. That's got an edge in it. When you run a steel blade along an aluminum surface, you're going to shave this stuff off. And I ruined the edge of that ruler, which I can't find a replacement for. So be it. The triangles do the job mostly. We'll find out when we do a big paper job. So now I have this. Which is familiar to anybody who knows anything about Lou Del Mazo. Now I have this. I'm always careful with material. I try to use as much as I can. Use it efficiently. It's just because it's a long trip to get more, and 20 minutes into downtown is a long trip in the New World. There. Now, the secret to cutting heavy stuff is different than one might imagine. You do not throw everything you've got at it and rip through it one at a time, because that moves the ruler and that just causes all kinds of problems. So I got a kind of a wonky grip here because that cut is right on the end of my finger. Doesn't matter. What matters is that I go through this stuff several times so that things don't move around, and I get a clean cut. I have not changed the blade. Change blades early, change blades often, because this stuff will sand the edge off a blade in a heartbeat. Convenience this time. I have cut these either way, but from this side or this side. Convention in my world is protect the part. I got a score in there so I can freehand it. The upside is the part is perfect. The downside is you probably want to use one of these at a time. And I ended up, I doubt I'll get another mask out of that. That's another proof of their utility. All right, where were we? Okay, let's see. There were only one or two of these that were symmetrical. This one actually turned out to be absolutely symmetrical, so I could make two. The rest of these are one-offs. So we went a little short. See, that's pretty darn close. That's good enough. This is not the money side. The only effort here is to be as nice as I can. And then that gets glued in, and then it's opposite number, rinse, repeat. These are going to be one piece, I think, because they're in the back. And away we go. Once that's done, this will be rigid and stable, and I can take some dimension. The first dimension I'm going to take is pretty obvious. I'm laying that down so I remember which way up it goes. The idea here is to it's going to center up a bit, or be centered up a bit. Then I want that number, and I want this number, and I can guess and gauge these others. And make a sheet of paper that is that absolute shape. And once I have a sheet of paper that's the absolute shape, I can transfer the paper to something else, cut it out. This here, this will not be white in the end. It's a piece of scrap white. Use the material again. I thought originally that what I would do would be, mark off this. I think you can see see the pencil line there. To mark this off and then cut it. But the more I think about it, the more I think it's going to be a mask and then this. So I work even harder at it. I realize that if I make a piece of paper and I put blue tape around it, then ultimately there'll be an edge that I can glue down, stick down to this, and get a more accurate cut. I don't know how much accuracy is accurate. The end of this, the last thing that's going to happen is, once that's in, the hole in the middle so you can hold it, is this edge is going to get welded shut with hot glue. Clean up the mess, then paint the whole shebang as black, finish the edges, and proceed to the base. I've begun some work on the last detail. He does absolutely have eyebrows and eyelashes in the movie. Therefore, this will have them. I'm working out a technique for shredding some black construction paper. And sticking on eyelashes is going to be like those big, model shops do. It's somebody's going to sit there and they're going to stick them on one hair at a time. So yours truly will probably film a short session and photograph the rest, or we'll see how that works out. Progress. I'm excited. I can't wait to get this thing to finished and to have the twins together. It occurs to me I ought to show you how I'm going to make that hair. Construction paper, black construction paper. I didn't recolor it, I haven't overpainted it or anything else. I think it'll be black enough. So what I did was I made sure that was squared flat and then cut different lengths here. And making hair is child's play itself. This will cut up the post-it note, but you'll be able to see what I'm doing. So I got a straight edge here. I have different lengths of cuts here. I get to my hair width. And I go after it with my aforementioned thin, fresh blade. That's fairly good yield with every cut because, well, that's not good, but it doesn't really matter. That's a fairly good yield with every cut because that paper's several layers thick. I might reject that one, it's a little thick. Get rid of that. Reject those. Oh, there's some good ones in there. We'll get them. And we'll make sure I have plenty enough more. I'm going to try to cut this direction and see if I can get it a little better. And it feels like an extreme angle on the blade assists this as well. So I'm not coming down. I'm not touching the paper like this. Perfect way to stab yourself. I'm not touching the paper like this. I'm coming in at an angle, as if making it more like a pair of scissors than a knife. You see what I get? And, some people have thick hairs. Occasionally, this is an ogre, so a few thick hairs is probably par for the course. But I can get me plenty enough to accomplish this in short order. I think the only way to describe this is a freaking mess. That's all the stuff that I had to cut out of here. What I have is the base for Shrek, and those sticky up things are where the letters will be suspended. And so I've tried to minimize the amount of material to the greatest degree possible. I brought out the big time tacky glue. Try not to show off brand names as always. It really is tacky. There's not a lot of water in this stuff. So the intent is to have it strongly hold the ends of each of these 1/4-inch dowels. That is foam core. Foam core is exactly what it purports to be. It's 2 pieces of paper with foam in the middle. And you cut it very carefully, you pierce the surface, and then try very hard to keep an angle up and down on your blade. I see where I should have sanded a touch more on some of these, but I'm not all that concerned about it. So I have several pieces of foam core, and this tube that came out of something or another, cut at what turned out to be more or less a 30-degree angle, and the bust will go here. So this is just to give it some robustness. And as usual, I forgot to cut a screw hole for the wall back here. But each of these pins will hold up a letter, and I need to start carving out the letters and put them on there. Currently, They look like this. I showed the design earlier. Just print it off the internet, usual stuff. And I'm going to carve out those letters and clean them up and mount them on each of these pins. The letters were originally in this sheet of paper. Let's try not to break my work. The letters were originally in this sheet of paper, and so that diagram there became exactly how I laid out the foam core. And I arbitrarily decided on a size and for the base and the core. Have enough oomph behind it to I'm trying to prevent rocking. So what happens is this hangs on the wall, more or less. This hangs on the wall more or less in that orientation, so it's going to try to pull it down. So pulling it down, this becomes a brace. And so this distance will be a brace. And again, this thing weighs grams overall, so weight is really not a consideration. So that should be enough to hold it on the wall, keep this square, and hold it from slipping or sliding. The letters being, grams or micrograms each. They will stick on the end of those pegs, and with everything painted, as Arctic a white as I can find, I'll use this stuff, that color, to paint it. Everything painted that color, it should more or less disappear. And I've included some photographs of that. But what I'm going to do here is I took a Forstner being a bit that is designed to make a clean, square hole edge. Anybody who does any kind of carpentry knows what those are. Basically, they have a point in the middle and then blades around the side. And of course, I put it up before I decided to videotape this, and I'm not dragging it out now. But the Forstner cuts down to the point where I have the paper surface on the back. See there? But I've removed all the foam. I now have this marvelous pit into which I can press this glue. And I'm of two minds, and you probably even noticed it. You see how tacky that stuff is. It's not liquid at all. On the first one, there was a fillet because of the way the glue came back out to the hole. Well, I tried to remove it in these, and I don't know. The fillet, I think, adds some strength to that joint, so it has some value. And there, I didn't add quite enough. So I need to give it another bit of a squirt. But I think in the end, the fillet is the right thing to do. So I'm just going to put a little bit right in here. That's probably too much. I don't know. We'll find out. And I maintain that the same wetting and then curing process is not enough, really. Because if I don't, the bit makes a square hole, the bit makes a more accurate hole, the bit also can tend to water the hole, and there's no such thing as a 1/4 inch dowel that's truly a 1/4 inch. I've only encountered that a few times, and I think I've used up all of that marvelous, perfectly 1/4 inch stuff I have. Frustrating. So there we go. And see, now that fillet will shrink a little bit when glue starts to cure. Well, I believe in the end that actually will make it a little more secure on the end, and I'm not sure that it wrecks the aesthetics. The only thing that only one other thing that I may do in the end, and I haven't, again, two minds. I may cover this edge in some paper. I'm thinking that I probably should stop waving this thing around, because if I keep waving this thing around, I keep making these things flop around, which I don't want to do. So that goes off to be ignored to cure for an hour or two, and then I'll start carving up letters. And once that's cured and solid, this is going to get whited out completely. I think the first one I didn't paint the foam core. In this case, I think I'm just going to paint the whole shebang. You throw a towel on the bench and just paint it. And that way the color's consistent throughout. And we do need the hole in the back for something back here for a nail in the wall to hold. And just weight doesn't matter. You know, really, with these things, you're more worried about wind than you are weight in the end. Because if you got the fan jacked up to 10 million, you might blow the darn thing off the wall.